Good afternoon, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 69th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Judy Lobel, and I am the Assistant Executive Director of the JCC. It is my pleasure to welcome you on this Wednesday afternoon to hear Jennifer Rosner, author of The Yellowbird Sings. The goal of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair is to bring the best new Jewish books and authors from around the world to Metro Detroit. This year, although the rooms we're sitting in may be different, the purpose remains the same. The book fair ends tonight, and we still have excellent lineup, this one and the last event of the evening. To see the full event schedule, learn about how to support book fair, watch events that you may have missed, or find our online store where you can find the Yellowbird Sings and lots of other hand-selected books and gifts, please visit our website listed below at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. This year, in order to provide as much programming to the community as possible, we've made all of our events free of charge. So if you enjoy the book fair events that you've attended, please consider it's not too late to become a patron or to donate to book fair. You can do either of those or both on our website, again, at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. We rely on all of you to support book fair and to make this annual event possible. So thank you in advance for becoming part of the family. The book fair team would like to thank the following for their support. Our major sponsor for the day is Andy and Larry Wolf. We have a very special event for you today, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in our YouTube comments section, or text the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they will take as many of your questions as they can. And while you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting events. The focus of today's event is The Yellowbird Sings. We have with us the author of the book, Jennifer Rosner, as well as Zibby Owens, who will moderate the discussion. The Yellowbird Sings is Jennifer Rosner's debut novel, translated and published around the world. It's the story of a mother, a child, and an impossible choice. Set in Nazi-occupied Poland, Rosa and her 5-year-old daughter, Shira, a musical prodigy, flee their town seeking shelter. But the day comes when their haven is no longer safe, and Rosa must decide whether to keep Shira by her side or give her the chance to survive apart. Previous to The Yellowbird Sings, Jennifer Rosner published a memoir, If a Tree Falls, about raising her deaf daughters in a hearing-speaking world and discovering genetic deafness in her family dating back to the 1800s. Her short writings have appeared in New York Times, the Massachusetts Review, The Forward, and elsewhere, and her children's book, The Mitten String, was named a Sidney Taylor Book Award notable. In addition to writing, Jennifer teaches philosophy. She lives in Western Massachusetts with her family. Zibby Owens is a CEO, author, literary influencer, podcast host, media personality, and mother of 4. She is the creator and host of the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Zibby, named NYC's most powerful book influencer by Vulture, conducts warm, inquisitive conversations with authors as wide-ranging as Alicia Keys and Leanne Dunham to Dahlia Owens and Jennifer Weiner. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Rosner and Zibby Owens. Hi there.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
Great. Hi, Jennifer. I'm excited to do this with you.
Me too. I just want to say how happy I am to be here and also to have Zibby as the interviewer of this conversation, because you are such a great supporter of authors and readers and humans generally. And I just really appreciate everything you do in the book world and well beyond that. So.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you about this book, which was so great and really just has such staying power. I think one of the best debuts of the year, particularly with Jewish themes and all of that. So can I ask you some questions about it? Okay. So we heard a little synopsis already, but basically, what inspired you to write this book, and what did you hope to achieve by writing it?
Okay. So the journey to getting to this novel is a kind of interesting one. As Judy mentioned earlier, I am a philosopher. I was a professor, and I had two daughters, and they were both born deaf. And this kind of turned my world upside down. I had been doing this kind of dry academic writing, and I didn't really love it very much. And then when the deafness in our family emerged, I just needed to start, I don't know, expressing personal, our decisions, my feelings, what we were going through, a lot of fears. And I found that kind of writing to be so nourishing. I had never done anything like that. I wasn't one of those people who had wanted to be a writer since she was a little girl. But this process was so this personal process and kind of self-expression was so meaningful and nourishing. And these little snippets of this eventually became a memoir, and I was giving a book talk actually through the Jewish Book Council. I was describing our journey with our daughters and how we were encouraging their every vocalization. We made a decision to give them hearing technology and to take a listening and spoken language pathway. And I was saying how much we were, encouraging our children to talk. And a woman in the audience described to me her childhood experience of having to be completely silent. She was hiding in a shoemaker's attic with her mother during World War II. And I couldn't stop thinking about that woman, and like as a child having to be silenced, as a mother having to keep her child silenced, what that must have been like. I ended up finding her and interviewing her, and then interviewing many other hidden children. So that was kind of the seed of the story. It got planted by this person's comments. One day at a book event that had nothing to do with hidden children or the Holocaust or anything, but it resonated so much with me because we were so much in the world of silence and sound, and then learning of this woman who needed to be silenced. It just kind of hooked on to me, and I couldn't let it go.
Wow. I think often about having to keep kids silenced during the Holocaust, and characters like Shira and Frank and others, when I think about how hard it's been even just to deal with my kids during the pandemic, and we have like every electronic at our fingertips, but even with all of that, how hard it is just to keep them basically inside and not socializing. And then I think, gosh, with the fear lurking, similar fear today, but obviously on a much different scale. How did parents, how did they do that? I don't know. I mean, and when you think about it, like, you even had Christina, the farmer's wife, come in and just say like, well, I just can't imagine how I would keep my son like this quiet either. Like, let me take her for a walk around the chickens or whatever. What did you find from all your research? Like, how did people do it? Or did they just do it because that was it, life or death? And so they did it.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, I think children grew up very, very quickly, and they were responsible and careful and conscientious very, very early on when necessity required it. But, one of the things that was really interesting about my interviews is, there were all these different scenarios of people who had been in hiding. So, there were those who were in these cramped spaces and having to be silent. There was a person who was hiding in plain sight on a neighbor's farm. There was someone who was carried over a ghetto wall in a suitcase. I mean, all these situations. There was a man who was in a school attic with his mom and aunt and uncle, and there were children at school and playing in the yard, and he was inside this attic looking out through these slats and having to be quiet. But what was unbelievable about his story was his mother found an atlas, and she spent time with him she would quiz him and say, if you had to get from Odessa to Warsaw, what path would you take? What route? And she taught him how to read while in this attic. And this man describes his time in hiding during the Holocaust as being cocooned in love, which is such a testament to that mom. I mean, it is so incredible what people did and their ingenuity and their creativity. And that was part of, I think, what inspired me to have the mother character, Rosha, be telling stories, and they're working on reading and music and other things, because this is how they got through that time. And my editor initially said, I can't even keep my kids still on, like dealing with a one snow day. How can they function in this barn for, what's essentially almost a year and a half or something? And that's kind of what she was encouraging me to set out to do, is to say, like, how can you hide, and what happens? Like, how do you use the bathroom? How do you brush your teeth? How do you function like this over this amount of time, and get through? And in listening to the stories of the hidden children, there was just so much resilience and intelligence that came into play. And it's very, very inspiring and humbling.
Wow. It also almost reminds me of that book Room, although they didn't have to be as quiet most of the time, but just what parents can do when it's just you and a child and limited materials, and you just have to make do with your imaginations. It's quite remarkable. And I also felt like, how were you able, like, I felt fully like I was in the situation after I read this book, that like I knew what it was like because you described it so well. How did you get all that from the people you interviewed? I mean, it felt like did you ever try to like bury yourself in hay? Because it felt very much like you had experienced it yourself.
Yeah. Well, there's two things. I mean, I didn't bury myself under hay, although we do have rabbits and we have a lot of hay around. And I could have done that, but I do know what hay really feels like and smells like and how it pokes at you. I think that my, every writer brings strengths and weaknesses to their work and has to kind of compensate for things that are harder for them and has an easier time with certain things. And I think that honestly, being a mom of deaf children enabled me to really slow down when it comes to sensory experience, which enables my ability as a writer to be descriptive of sensory occurrences. And so I think that is something. I think I spent a real lot of time, what would it sound like? What would it smell like? How did it feel? Really slow. And that's what I think enabled the sense of really being there, because of the way I was able to harness. We had done so much work with our children about not just hearing, but seeing and getting every sensory perception in order to gain as much information about the world as possible. And I think that training actually has really helped me as a writer. But I also did a lot of travel for this novel. So I had written a draft of it first. So I interviewed the hidden children, many. And then I set all their stories aside because I wasn't going to write any of their particular stories. I thought maybe they would write them, or maybe their children or grandchildren will write those stories. I set them aside and I wrote a story kind of out of my imagination. And then I felt I really should do some kind of cross-check here, because I'm here in Western Massachusetts imagining the convent and the barn and all these other things. Just want to make sure I'm okay, And I found a guide who was just this amazing man. He read my manuscript in advance, and then he planned our trip, and he took me, actually my eldest daughter came with me, and we went to several places. We went to this area of farmland where you got to see how it would really be to try to hide someone in your barn. Because, initially you think of a farm and you think they have a lot of land and it might be fine, pretty safe. But, for community reasons, the houses were very close together and the barns were right there too. And then the land you had was in these narrow swaths going back. So you didn't actually have a lot of space from your neighbor. Your neighbors were kind of right on there. It was very hard to keep anything private. And in fact, even when we were there looking around, people were wondering who we were and asking questions. So you could see that, people were very curious, and hiding someone in your barn would be really hard. He took us to several convents, but one where Jewish children had been hidden. And this was really interesting too, because, I had sort of concocted a bit of a grand convent initially, stone and then he said, we're a pretty poor country. It's brick here. And but there were all these sensory details there, the smell of soup as you walk in and the way your feet move on the floor and what the partitions were like where people were hidden and all this kind of sensory information that was so incredible to have as a novelist. And then he also took us, much to my daughter's chagrin, to this area of primeval forest where my character, since my character was going to be hiding in the forest in winter, I insisted that we go in winter. And so we're tromping around. It's freezing cold. My daughter is saying, why didn't you set your book in Greece? I mean, what are you doing? But we weren't. Couldn't I do? I know. But to see the denseness of the forest, to see how someone could possibly dig a burrow in that situation, and all the ingenuity that came to those people who survived in the woods and in family camps and all these things that happened. So there was travel. I also got to go to Tel Aviv and I met a violin maker who's sort of this amazing man who reclaims violins that were salvaged from Holocaust times, and he rebuilds them and they're played around the world in orchestras, and just so many things that really enriched my novel. But in addition, I consulted with so many people. So there was, a forest tracker, because I had to figure out how my character could move through the woods, and a mushroom forager, and, a nun, and all these different people. But most importantly, a masterclass violinist, because of Shira being a violin prodigy. I needed to understand how that was going to work out, what she would play, when would a piece be played, etc. So there was a lot that went into this journey of understanding what it must be like to be hidden in this barn and then move to a convent or into the woods, et cetera, et cetera. So each step took a lot of research.
And tell me about the decision to have the male owner of the barn, Heinrich, sort of come and visit her each night and right next to her daughter, and how that decision got made in the novel, and then how was that okay? Because there was some noise involved with that. Like, how do you think they got away with that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, let me say that while I set most every personal story aside, when I made decisions like this, I wanted to make sure that they have happened. And this is a scenario that I heard about in a less than entirely clear way. There was a woman, nearly 80 or whatever, who was talking to me about her experience being hidden. She was quite young in the barn with her mother, and there was a farmer who she believed visited every night. She didn't totally know what was happening. Although actually I'm going to try to find it because I think it's really incredible and moving. She wrote a poem as an adult. And poetry, how it's, something in your experience will just show up for you. I have it on my phone. And this is this woman who said to me, that he came and they talked about the news, and she thinks maybe he loved her mother, is called Wild Strawberries. And this is her poem. It's very short. Sometimes under cover of darkness, Mr. R would visit. I would see my mother's silhouette, her long hair down her back, and in the dark, the outline of Mr. R's powerful shoulders as he sat opposite her on the straw-covered attic floor. He would talk in hushed tones. I sat beside my mother, but apart from them, feeling a vague excitement mingled with fear. He would bring sweet, wild strawberries in the night.
Wow.
And, I was also very much aware of how much sex was traded in the Holocaust, traded for survival. And so the scenario felt realistic, and it felt like, this family, I wanted this to be a blurry situation because, this family is the couple, the farmer and his wife, they're risking their lives, they're risking their families. I think the wife is in many ways righteous, but yet, she gives eggs and bread to the child, not to the mom. She knows something's happening in the barn, but there's a question of whether it's kind of a relief that it's happening and that there's some pressure off her. I mean, I wanted it to be a really blurry scenario. I wanted it to be you wonder whether he fell in love with her, Rosha, in the barn, or whether it really was just sort of payment of a sort, etc. So I thought it would create obviously tension, but also questions about how we respond in times with the challenges that we're faced with, because we make a lot of moral judgments of people and how they respond in circumstances, but we're not necessarily faced with those same challenges, right? We want to believe we'd be one thing. Sometimes we might be a modeled thing. And I think often people were modeled in their reaction, kind of both good and bad. I learned that one criteria for being accepted into righteous among the nations in Yad Vashem is that there was no sexual predation of any sort, but also learned that there were many people who were candidates and then rejected for this reason, that there had been. So just a lot of blurry stuff. And the noise is a really good question, actually, about noise in the barn. And maybe the only thing to say is that she was trying to keep it still as possible and trying to hope that it wasn't going to kill them all. And, this is very complicated.
Yes, very complicated. And I feel like you left it a little ambiguous because there was one stretch where he didn't visit as often and she was missing that. She was welcoming him back when eventually he did. And there was sort of a question mark, like, do you fall in? It's almost like, what is that called? The Stockholm syndrome, or you fall in love with your abusers after a while. And anyway, interesting to
yeah, and that was also part of the blurriness I wanted there because, her body responds even if the situation is quite horrible. And I had gotten some reactions of people upset about this. And I was like, but this is what happens because we are bodies also. And it happens even when the situation is very hostile. Your body can respond, and then people feel guilty for having responded, but it's something that happens. And anyway, I think I wanted the complexity to be there.
And tell me about the decision to have music be such a part of it. I feel like this all sort of gels with the sound and your daughters and
it does.
Your music. Well, anyway, you take it away from there.
Well, there's so many parts to this. I mean, the first thing is that my father, who I lost a year ago, he played violin every single day. And he was a very dedicated violinist. He wasn't a prodigy or a virtuoso, but he played daily, and it was really infused in my life because I heard it every day of my life. And music, I saw that he used music. He also composed some music, and it seemed to me that it was a way of him somehow connecting to his Jewish roots through the music he was writing as well. And then I studied opera, and he and I made music together. And so I saw the connective power of music. I also have to say that it links to something else, a few things that are dealing with the deafness in my family, which is that, when we looked back at our family tree, and I eventually discovered these great aunts who lived in a little shtetl in the 1800s who were deaf. And the one substantial story I learned about them is that when they went to sleep, they would tie a string from their wrist to their babies at night. And so that in the darkness, if the baby cried or fussed, they would feel the tug and they'd wake to care for them. And this string in the darkness was such a model of connection and mothering. And I think I had felt in many ways unheard by my mom, except when I sang. So music was one of those times when she really attended. But I wanted a string so badly between my daughters and me, and I didn't feel that was really I wasn't sure if it was in my repertoire. And I think I chose violin, not just for my father, but because it was a string instrument. And I wanted Shira to have this connective string that moved through, and her mother plays cello and her father played violin, and her grandfather was a violin maker. So there was this string instruments and string moving through the story for very personal reasons all through.
And tell me a little more, if you are willing, about why you didn't feel like you felt heard by your mother.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really complicated. My mom has a hearing loss that isn't supposedly linked to the genetic deafness that's carried by my husband and I having recessive genes. So we're not totally sure about how it all links, but she too grew up with some hearing loss. which I think caused her to retreat in certain ways. I think it's an energy saver. I think it's conservation for deaf people sometimes, but I think it's also that a variety of things that happened in her own childhood caused her to be more kind of turned in and not turned out. And like, I think she loves me dearly, but just wasn't able to be as attentive and focused. And I think it was intermittent, which is very hard for children. Sort of, you think you sometimes have it and then it's gone, and it's very hard to hold on to. So it was something that was quite hard. And yet, like I said, it was funny. Like when I sang, it was like everything stopped and she was right there. And so I sang a real lot. And, I studied voice, and it was the thing I really took on, because that connection meant so much to me. And so I think that when it came to creating these characters, I think the transportive power of music and connective power of music, it was like right there as a subject matter.
And then with the book being divided into 3 parts and having 3 basic identities for Shira as she goes through different stages of her hiding and her travels, and culminating in this fantastic ending, I thought. Tell me about the division of her time in those ways, and how you even renamed the characters, and then started the character rather, and in each section it became, you referred to her as the new name, not even her original name, which I thought was really interesting. Tell me about that.
Thanks. Well, so I thought it was really important for us to remember, now that we're in this age where we can find anyone, if you want to see your 4th grade friend, you just go on Facebook and put their name in, and there she'll be, but people lost the thread of not just their families, but themselves. And I was really struck by this. I was struck by it emotionally. I went to the Holocaust Museum in DC and saw this almost like a program where there were these pamphlets of people, and they would have a face and it would say, "Do you remember me?" And it was this literal question. Like, if you could tell me that I'm, Anna, whatever, from this village, then I would be able to go back and find my family and figure out, where I come from and who I am. And it was just incredible. And it kind of resonated with me also as a philosopher, because what we are as we persist in time, and when we shed particular things, are we still that same person? And what does it mean to be a self over time? And especially in a situation where all these things have to change. Your name changes for your safety. Not everyone got to have their name buried in a jar that got unearthed later. A lot of the time they just changed their name and they forgot the other one, and they were 5 years old and they don't know their mother and father's actual name. They just knew them as Mama and Tata, etc. So all of that way in which the threads can get frayed or broken completely, I felt was really interesting and important, because later there was really no way back. You couldn't figure it out. And so people were just lost. It was incredible. And so that was just an important point for me to see that this is what happens in war. It happens especially in a brutal way to children, because the thread gets lost and then they can't quite connect and find their way back. So that's kind of part of what I did with that, with the different names. I also wanted it to be linked to the fact of so much religious confusion, because, your name gets changed to a Catholic name, and you're put in a convent, and now you're praying to this, to this God, and you're listening to these Psalms. And I wanted even the music. There was this sort of the chaotic Jewish music beforehand, and then the orderly music of the convent. And it was soothing to her. And there were many hidden children, I'd read about who, ended up in other settings where they clung on to the orderliness or the Mary statue or something that felt like some kind of anchor or mother figure or something, just to kind of orient and reorient. But then later, it's so confusing to figure out who you are and who you were and how to be now. So I wanted all that to be up in the air, because I saw that very clearly, especially in some of the people I interviewed. They just, they either never quite found the thread, or they imposed a new thing. I'm going to be a Jew. I'm going to Israel. I'm going to whatever. And that's what they did. But it was like a imposition in a way, like they decided it by fiat rather than sort of an organic development.
I hadn't really, obviously I had thought about it, but your book just put this in such stark, black and white details of how hard it is to find somebody and how many people have just drifted, and even the like near miss type situations that must have happened all the time. It just is like heartbreaking. I think that's one of the things about this book is like every part of it, logically reading it has actually happened in real life, magnified millions of times. And like the depth of that sort of suffering and those emotions just makes this book even more powerful. Sort of riding on the coattails of that trauma, collective trauma. One of the questions actually from the chat, and you started talking a little bit about your philosophy background, is what type of philosophy do you teach, and how has that affected your writing? And it sounds like it has.
Yeah. So I'm my work has been in the area of moral psychology and in the nature of self, but so from in the academic realm, it's really quite abstract and theoretical, and that bothered me a lot because it's about the self, so you think that we should be able to relate to that, but the work I did sort of as before kind of really moving more into writing had to do with the ways in which there can be ambivalence in the self, and how, I edited this anthology called The Messy Self because it was about how we can have these warring factions within and warring desires. So we might want something, but we might not want to want it, and all this kind of conflict and ambivalence and fracture. And I think it has really affected my work as a writer because, especially for instance, when Rosha makes this decision to give her child up for her safety, so she'll live. And yet she carries this shame or guilt. It's inevitable to take it off your shoulders. You go to a family camp and someone else brought their child along. So maybe I could have made it. I could have made it to that camp with my child and I didn't have to give her up. But then you see at the family camp that maybe some children die because there's danger there too. So there was no exact answer here. Everyone was just doing anything and everything they could, the best decision they could make. Then the daughter will be in the barn and gets upset and makes a loud chirp, and then carries this for her forever, thinking, if I hadn't made that chirp, maybe I'd still be with my mother. My mother sent me away because I was too loud. If I could have been quieter, So the kinds of ways in which our minds do this thing where we can carry, even when I say I was given up so that I could live, my mother gave me away so I could live. Sits in the same mind with, if I hadn't made that chirp, maybe I could have still been there, and we do this all the time because we can draw walls in our minds, and what it is to be a conflicted self, what it is to have self-deception, etc. All these kind of things, are kind of undergirded in emotional experiences that I was trying to, include in the novel.
It's also, what does it even mean to be safe? And what does it mean to live, right? There was one part where she's saying, well, safe is with my mom. What do you mean, keep me safe? Like, I was safe. I was with her. And I feel like that's what kids long for, right? That's what they know. And to have all that taken away and say, no, now you're going to go with a bunch of strangers to a convent and take away all of my love, but you'll be alive. And what 5-year-old would take that choice? I mean,
yes. I mean, I know. I think it's just so complicated because everyone will do their best and tries to make the life that they're given to make as much sense as possible. But there are these emotional pulls that are so deep and profound. And, it was also why, as I was writing this, and there were children being separated from their parents at the border, and I'm thinking to myself, we're going to lose the thread, as we have, as there's 540 who can't be put back together with their parents now, and now I'm gonna, if in 75 years someone interviews them for their novel and they sit down and say, I'm still in this acute pain because I was separated back then when I was 5. I mean, that's what I learned, is having these interviews with people who, have made these beautiful lives for themselves, but the pain of that time is just, it's endless, it just doesn't go away, it's right there under the surface. And that kind of emotional complexity is what I really wanted to capture, and how difficult it was.
Well, you did. You captured it all. It was, it's, all these themes that you bring up are so thought provoking, and speak to a whole generation. What does it mean to have a generation of people in pain growing up, and then the effects on them raising kids? I remember in college, I did some report about children of Holocaust survivors and what it meant to grow up as them, with parents who had such trauma in their own lives. And then I think about even now, which is, again, not the same, but just a period of time where people feel at risk. And what does that do? What does that do to, whether or not to send your kid to homeschool or, leave the city, or all these decisions parents have to make now? It's still like, what do? You have to make your own. It's like you have to make your own way again, right? There are not clear guidelines, and do you trust officials? And I don't know. There's just in a way.
Yeah. It's very complicated. And I remember interviewing one man who, I went into his home, and it was this, you see that he just has really built this beautiful life. He showed me pictures of his grandchildren's bar mitzvahs, and it was all this, kind of healed world. And then we sat down, and the interviews took, quite a long time. I'd be there for 5 hours or something. Okay. And, by the end, first of all, we're both in tears, but he even, at one point sort of, we were talking, and he had been kind of shifted around in these different ways that were very trying as a young child. And I think, it's like, while we were talking, it's almost like his eyes like shuddered over, and he just said to me, if you told me my mother was in the other room, I wouldn't go in there. And it's just, there was so much pain, that's all. And longing that went for so long, unmet, in this case, longing and then kind of rebuilding something over it. But it's just, there's a hole there.
And what do you think about inherited trauma? I know I was kind of throwing that around, and someone in the chat is asking about it as well. What do you think about it?
I mean, I think that I'm no expert on that, but I just feel like it's cellular, probably. That's what I think. I think it's cellular, but also, I think about this as a mom of 2 children. So both were born deaf, but my first one was it was such a surprise. I mean, it sounds like it shouldn't be, because my mom had hearing loss, but my mother had hearing loss, supposedly due to mastoid infections. And then we learned there was like this hidden tree that had family tree that had asterisks of deaf people, but I had no idea about it. So if I call from the hospital and say my daughter failed the test, and my dad's like, oh, I'm sure it's, fluid, that kind of thing. But I think that what happens is your whole body goes into a mode of, okay, how are we going to deal with this, et cetera. And I know that my older daughter absorbed so much of, our reactivity to her. Whereas my second daughter, by then, I just flung her over my shoulder and kept singing, because, I knew by then that whether she could hear it or not, she was going to get it. She saw my face, she felt my body, she felt the air, she knew what I was doing. She kind of knew as much without her sound as with it, but I didn't know that the first time. So, but I do think that you can just see, I mean, maybe it's, what do they say about the oldest child and the first pancake and all that stuff. But I think that, they do feel your reactivity, and they're so sensitive and so smart. So there's both like the cellular, but there's also the kind of transference inevitably. And we're all doing our best and trying not to, and putting on our calm, brave, whatever. But of course, they're much smarter than that. They know everything. So, I can't hide anything in my family. My kids know it all. So I think that it's quite real, is what I'll say. Inherited either, one way or another,
Yes, the ability of kids to pick up on emotions.
Yeah, I mean, especially
and not pick up their clothes is,
yeah,
crazy. Tell me a little more about writing this book. You said you didn't grow up wanting to be a writer, and yet here you are with a memoir and a children's book and a novel and all of it.
I know. Well, I found it all out when I was 40 that I loved writing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing, the vicissitudes of life. So, because of Sophia's deafness, and then just trying to journal that experience, and then learning that I love this so much. I love it a lot more than like logically constrained analytic philosophy writing. And so, the memoir, I think I really needed to express all those things. And what I love about writing so much is that you think you're writing about one thing, and then it all gets turned on its head when you realize, when the work is coming out, you realize. So for instance, I thought we were working on whether our children would hear, but ultimately when I examined all that stuff with my mom and all the string and et cetera, it was whether I would hear them. I think that's what this was all about. It was all a big question of whether I could hear, not whether they could, but I didn't know that at first. Someone would say, what are you working on? I'm like, well, it's about raising our daughters in a hearing speaking world, and whether they would, it's just interesting. There's so much self-discovery, and there's so much, I think what I love about it is that I'm connected to sort of subconscious things, in a way that I never could be, I think, if I just went along, without sitting down and being quiet and trying to write. So I really value it very much and feel so lucky to be doing it. And yeah, I mean, I stopped doing the sort of big, high powered academic track to be on the floor with my kids anyway, and thank God for that. And then got to be writing in between, and that my process is I write in between. I right now everyone's home, so in between all of that, I try to write, and that's been sort of true the whole time as they were growing up. I mean, now they're actually 17 and 20, so it's not as nearly like it was, although they do still want me to make every meal, it seems like, but they can make their own. So that's good. But yeah, it's just been like that. I've been sort of writing in between things and being the on-call audiologist and the on-call, et cetera, all the time. But have managed to, to do this writing, which to me is such a gift of self-expression.
But writing a novel is not the same. I mean, there's one thing where you write with your emotions and to sort out your feelings, and even just to chronicle your experience for whoever's benefit and to share with others. And there's all these arguments for why that your memoir came into the world. But this is like, and I see all of the parallels, of course, but just teaching yourself how to write fiction, that's pretty impressive. Like, how did you take any courses? Did you Google how to write a novel? Like, what did you do? I can't, people have several failed novels, tucked away in drawers before they come out with something. Was this just your first out of the gate, smash hit?
It's my first novel, but that, when I met that lady at the book talk for my memoir, that was in 2010. So this thing's been batting around a really long time. So while it is my first memoir, maybe someone else would have written, my first novel, someone might have written 3 or 4 of them in this time. I don't know. But for me, since I am self-taught, I kind of shot my wad with that PhD in philosophy. I can't really go back and get the MFA, which I would really love to do. But I don't know. I don't see how I can do that. But I did I went to Breadloaf for a session, and I went to Tin House for a session. There's sort of these writing workshops in the world, had some really wonderful teachers, and I just read a lot, and that helps. And reading helps you become a good writer.
What do you like to read? What are your favorite genres or authors?
Yeah. I have to say that at different times, given whatever I've been trying to write, there are certain reads that have made a huge difference for me. So during the course of writing The Yellowbird Sings, Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See was this book I just wanted, I could have wrapped it around myself with a cloth and carried it around, because there's just something about the sentences, the sentence by sentence beauty of his writing. The structure of that novel is like that box where the jewel is. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing. I mean, to examine and I've read it many times because I was reading it as a writer, not only as a reader. And that was very, very meaningful to me. There are a lot of books like Toni Morrison's work, Marilyn Robinson's work. These are writers you read and just are studying, how they put that together. How do you make, how do you incorporate that magical element in that way in that special way? Or how do you have the ordinary rise to the extraordinary? Marilyn Robinson takes the most ordinary thing, and you're reading and you think, ugh, like, so there are writers like that who have been really influential. And I remember while I was working on my memoir, I kept going back to The History of Love by Nicole Krauss, and I kept going back to her ex-husband's book, Jonathan Safran Foer's work, et cetera. So because there was sort of an experimental quality to it that I was interested in, and there was like a looseness that, I was going from philosophy writing to literature and wanting to kind of stretch. And so there were you kind of go to different books at different times for different things, I guess. That's how it is for me.
So funny, when I started my podcast, I took a lot of English in school and all of that, but school was kind of a long time ago at this point. And as a grown-up, when I've been reading, I wasn't reading, like, as you said, as a writer, right? I was just reading and enjoying and whatever. And author after author would say, well, no, when I take apart the book and I take apart the structure and I analyze this and I analyze and I was like, you do? Really? Do you think that the authors intended it that way? And it turns out, yes, they did.
Yeah.
It seems so obvious now, but it's really part of the process. You have to sort of have that whole, perspective on the project and the in-depth research, as I guess you can.
Well, it's interesting too, because like in the course of writing this novel, I would read the draft just for verbs.
Wow.
Well, let me just think about the verbs. Are these the best verbs? Are they active? Do they have the power I want them to have, or the passivity I want, or, that kind of thing, and just the verbs. And then I would read just for setting. Do you feel you're in the barn? Do you feel you're in the woods? Do you feel, can you really feel that, would that sound, et cetera? Like, how do I make this vivid? How do I make it feel this way? So, yeah, there's those 10 years, So.
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. Well, good for you. However long it took. Did you ever want to send it out? Like, did you ever feel like, okay, this is good enough? Or did you know you wanted to keep going? And then how did you end up selling it?
Yeah. Well, no, I never felt it was good enough. I think that's the philosophy training too, where it's so critical, very, very critically. I'm trained really critically, sadly. And in fact, the beauty of some writing environments I've been in is that they would have this thought where if you hear someone's new writing, you just say what's working. And I was like, that's amazing. We're talking about what's working. I've never even done that before. I always used to talk about what isn't working. So anyway, it's a beautiful thing, and it actually helps you improve greatly, because somehow when you hear what's working, that stuff rises and the other stuff falls. So it's a really great thing, and it's a much more healthy world for me. I'm so happy to be in it. But let's see. I worked on it a long time. I ended up sending it. It was kind of a circuitous route, as many, many publishing routes are. I had an agent for my memoir. She wasn't sure about this novel. We decided to part ways, so I was unagented. But there was an editor who had passed on my memoir, but had written the nicest note. It was like the loveliest fail, She thought the writing was beautiful. She loved the story, but she just felt she couldn't make it big enough for her. And that was Amy Einhorn, who publishes really big books. And so she loved it, but she couldn't take it. So I said, what about just Amy Einhorn? Like, what if we just sent it to her? And my agent, my soon-to-be ex-agent was like, I can't, I don't think it's ready, whatever. And I was like, okay. So I sent it myself to Amy, and I said, look, Amy, you passed on my memoir, but I remember it was such a nice rejection. Would you consider reading it? And she said, I will read it. And she accepted it. So unagented, and then said, so now you need to get an agent. Yeah. And I said, well, if you've accepted my novel, I'm pretty sure I can get one, And so I did. And that's how it happened, kind of in a backward way. But, obviously if my ex-agent, had she sent it to Amy, she would have taken it, but she didn't. So I sent it myself. And Amy and we worked on it. It wasn't done yet. In fact, the book, I think I had written every single moment of the entire book. So what jumps in time now? I had written a lot of that story, the whole New York story. There was a second daughter. She couldn't bond to her. You know, there was like all kinds of stuff on the cutting floor. Amy said, you know, I think the heart of the story is in the barn. I really care about this daughter, not that daughter, that kind of thing. And so it took shape that way, where we really expanded the barn and this journey during the war only, and then kind of made a move to the later years. And I do want to say, I mean, it's always hard in these conversations because you never know if there are people who haven't read, and you don't want to do any spoiling, but, and I won't, but I just want to say that, you know, in making a decision about the ending, a lot of it had to do with respecting what I've learned from interviews of reunifications and how complicated they are. And my daughter character's 5 when you're really invested in her life. And that's a very simple time compared to being nearly 30. And what that really would be like to be true to it, to be fair to it, to give honor to the people who struggle with the complexities of finding someone after so many years and having such complicated emotions about it, wanting to make sure to give that honor and not just wrap a big bow around something that's complicated. And so that kind of leads me to say that in the thing I'm working on now, there's some revisiting of this concept.
I was about to ask that, so thank you. What are you working on now?
Yeah, so I decided that I started with these 2 characters that are completely new and different. It's after the war, which I think is important because, you know, there are people who don't want to even pick up a novel that's set in the Holocaust, which, you know, is a fact of this novel. So I joke now, I think it should just be called post-war, just so you know. So it's post-war, but it's right after the war, and there's a boy and a girl and a brother and sister. And I wanted to explore something I learned from someone I interviewed, which was that she went after the war and she would find Jewish children in Christian settings and transport them to Palestine, to that was British mandated Palestine at the time. And this was also like a very complicated thing for each individual child. So it might have been, you know, in terms of rescuing Jews after the war, it makes total sense as a population management issue. But as a human individual to individual issue is really complicated. And I wanted to explore that. But one thing that happens is that these children end up in a kibbutz in Israel, and there's this violin prodigy. And so we're going to circle back, and her and her mom, you know, you're going to kind of see the middle and end that you didn't see here, because I really want to do what it's due, and I didn't want to dishonor some real things that I felt were very important to give their space, you know, and not tack on like a weird second novel on a first one kind of thing.
Oh, I love that. Well, if anybody has more questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I feel like I tried to weave in most of them already, but if there are any more, please feel free. And by the way, Jennifer, a lot of people are encouraging you to go back and get your MFA. So
they are?
It's too.
I can't see. Oh, okay. I found the comments now. Okay.
While we're waiting to see if any more comments come in with questions, I should say, I was wondering if you had any advice for aspiring authors, in case there are any out there listening.
Yes. I think my advice is persistence and faith. You know, just keep going back and having enough faith that whatever it is you write each day, whether it looks like it has no relationship to the thing you wrote yesterday, whether it doesn't seem like it's very good, etc. I really do believe that the mind is this incredible web, and that these things are related, and that if you kind of give yourself the freedom and the chance, and that you keep going and keep persevering, that it's going to show up there and you're going to see it. And I've always been really fascinated by how, you know, people can take cards of plot almost and like shuffle them one way and you'd have one story, and shuffle them another way and you'd have another story. And so we just have to understand that our mind connects dots, you know. So if you're there putting out your, you know, moment, they will relate to each other eventually, you know. And if we just kind of give ourselves that trust you know, and to keep doing it, because it does take a lot of work. I mean, it takes a real lot of work, but you can do it if you stick with it, I say, after 10 years.
And are you still singing?
No, I haven't sang as much. My husband is very upset about it, actually. He's always saying, why aren't you singing? I sing in the shower.
All right.
There's been some times when I thought of joining some groups around here, but I also get kind of picky. Like, I like to choose what I sing. This is also why sometimes it's hard to be in book groups, because you're like, I want to choose what I read. Even though if you just go along with it, you find all these amazing things that you wouldn't have, you know? So yeah, I probably just have to give myself the chance. Well, maybe after this conversation, I'll get an MFA, join a singing group.
Yeah, you have a lot on your to-do list.
It'll be I'm inspired. So.
Naomi from the audience is asking if your children read your books.
They do. They read everything. My older daughter actually read my novel in draft several times and had really awesome advice, actually, plot ideas, etc. My younger daughter said she was afraid to read it because if she didn't like it, she'd hurt my feelings. So she took her time and then finally read it and said it was good. So that made me happy. But they do read it either immediately or eventually. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all the questions that came in. If anybody has any more questions, please feel free to ask. And just a reminder, you can get a copy of the Yellowbird Sings here at the link in the comments through the JCC. And there it is. If anybody wants to buy a copy, which I would highly recommend if you don't already have one, this book is beautiful and your writing is beautiful, and whatever magic you did analyzing texts and verbs and structure and everything, it worked, and it was really great. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, as I knew it would be. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, there's
Thank you so much, both Jennifer and Zibby. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. In fact, somebody asked the question about who was the narrator, that the narrator of the book was the person who did the audio. The audio.
Oh, I love her. Her name is Anna Koval. She's British. And I was lucky because Macmillan let me kind of audition a few different audio narrators. And I chose her. It was one of her first, maybe her first audiobook. She's been an actress, but she hadn't done audio narration. But I just loved her because she was sensitive, emotionally astute, but also like let the language sort of speak for itself, where sometimes you audition someone and it seems so dramatic. You're like, do we really have to add that much drama? I'm not sure, etc. So I was really thrilled with her. I thought she was fabulous.
That came in at the very end. So I saw that and I thought that was a great question. And I don't know if people know that you had the opportunity to pick the author. That's so interesting. So thank you both for being here. It was an excellent event. And thank you everyone at home for joining us. Our next and last event of the 2020 Pandemic Book Fair, or the virtual book fair, is Houdini, the Elusive American, by Adam Begley at 7 p.m. I hope you'll join us. If you liked this discussion and you think that some of your family or friends might enjoy it, you can copy the YouTube link and send it to people, or they can go to the JCC, the Cultural Arts website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/book fair, where you can find this recording as well as all of the book fair recordings that have taken place over the last week. Remember, again, to like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit the website for all the things that are coming up. We do have some exciting, we'll be announcing it in the next week or so, some films as part of a film festival pop-up that will be starting, if I'm not mistaken, December 23rd, that you won't want to miss. So have a great evening, and hope that you'll participate in tonight's program. Thank you.